Alright, this is the introductory video for week 3 for COM 250 CMC, the online version. You can tell I'm recording all of these kind of in one setting with a little break between each one because I'm wearing the same clothes. So I'll have to be mindful of what I wear in my other video messages. Wardrobe, lest you realize how slovenly and unfashionable I really am. I quit paying attention to fashion around the time that Kurt Cobain left us, I think. So for week 3, we'll begin covering what is really my favorite part of computer-mediated communication and what I personally find to be the most interesting and arguably the most important. And so as such, you guys may have to rein me in at times to move on from it. But in week 3, we'll begin covering this book, YouTube. Online Video and Participatory Culture is the name of the book. And of course, the book, examines YouTube in particular, but it also looks at, and we will use it as a way to talk about video and the way that video in a digital environment has kind of changed the game in a lot of ways. And again, that's, I think, the most fascinating and interesting part, and a lot of that has to do with my prior experiences. I haven't had a chance to tell you a lot about that, and I don't know now the extent to which that will have come out in other material for the first 2 weeks. But a little background about me. I worked in broadcast news, radio, and television for, in a previous life, as they say. And so I guess at my heart, I'm an old, TV and radio guy. And so with that in mind, I find things that are more in line with that, more interesting and important. But that's a personal preference. But I think as I said in the introductory video to the course, the advent of, you've really seen video online and video produced by and distributed by amateurs, I'm going with the air quotes again, really has been a major shift. YouTube has a lot of that kind of content. We're all walking around taking videos on our cell phones and posting them wherever. And I'm already tempted to fall down a rabbit hole of the actual kind of lecture or presentation on this material, and I'll try and hold back from that. But basically, video historically has been a medium that required access to certain kinds of equipment that not everybody had. And so the gatekeepers of that were, journalism or communication or media departments in colleges and universities or TV stations, production houses, things like that. And so that limited who could do it. From an access standpoint, the skills are not that hard, as you'll see when we get into some other things. It's not that hard at all from a skill standpoint to at least be competent. Lord knows I'll never be confused for Steven Spielberg, but to at least be competent is not that technically difficult. It's just kind of a mythology around video that has evolved because historically it was, access to the skills were very, very controlled. But that is the point. That is the major shift. And that has also led to a participatory culture, consumers and audiences participating in creating media content, remixing it, parodying it. I'm getting overly excited talking about it already, and stop myself. Let's get on to what's in the book. In chapters 1 and 2, we'll have time for the other stuff. It begins with kind of a history of YouTube, and I'll show you a couple of videos, give you links to them that the book talks about as kind of big cases in the history of YouTube. Just as if you studied the history of, if you studied the history of television, you would talk about, Edward R. Murrow. If you studied the history of radio, you would know that Marconi is credited as the inventor. These kinds of big historical moments. With respect to YouTube, a couple of big ones are the Lonely Girl 15 thing and the Lazy Sunday video. There's also one that I talk about, Leroy Jenkins video. You'll be given links to those, and you'll see what they mean and what they're about. But there are important historical moments in the development of YouTube. The screen is making, on the other computer, is making a weird like thing. Anyway, YouTube is an articulation of the concepts behind what's called Web 2.0. These are shifts in patterns of consumption, audiences taking power, becoming creators, things like that. And so that's, user content on YouTube is that. And so obviously it becomes a forum for a democratization of media, more people having access to have a voice, or a place where information is free, and therefore accessible to more people, bridging the digital divide some. So that's an idea teased out in the book. Participatory culture that I touched on is a big idea. That's talked about in the book. And then, I also talk in the notes that you have about folk culture, high culture, mass culture, and popular culture, and how they feed in. They're historical concepts, how they feed in to YouTube. But participatory culture suggests active rather than passive audiences. And so everyday do-it-yourself creativity getting kind of more juice in society. And of course, this raises, kind of the point that we come to in Chapter 1 is how that raises concerns over issues of expertise, authority, gatekeeping, legal issues with copyright. I mean, it's all very big, very important stuff, and you'll have some videos. Also, Chapter 2 gets into that as well. Chapter 2, looks at the relationship between YouTube and the mainstream media. Amateur video, for example, tends to get either demonized or glamorized depending upon one's perspective. And so there's a real tension between mainstream media, professional media, and sort of what's called prosumer media, a kind of a portmanteau of producer and consumer. So that's a big important idea that gets talked about in Chapter 2. And that gets into copyright sometimes, and we talk about copyright, fair use, which is a big idea. There's material that I can't create the way that I would like to for this class because copyright issues come into play. And so, YouTube has been framed as a threat to intellectual property, copyright, and yet, if you want to be a creative critic, sometimes you have to take a bit of a license with that. And fair use, fair use comes into play here as well. But that's an idea here as well. But in YouTube, new business models and more accessible tools of production are provoking new and uncertain relationships between alternative and mainstream media, kind of exposing these issues about media authority control. You'll have some videos. One video you'll have will look at transmedia storytelling, and beyond learning about that concept as a part of participatory culture, you'll also learn some things about some new ideas you maybe hadn't thought of about why copyright and intellectual property laws aren't necessarily designed to allow us to be effective creators of content. And that's talked about more in this book as well. But that is, I did this with about a minute left actually on my time limit. I controlled myself well, I guess. But that's our discussion of chapters 1 and 2, our overview of chapters 1 and 2 for the YouTube book. And that's, some week 3 material. We'll also in week 3 begin to discuss some basics of video production, shooting, editing, things like that. And there'll be some tutorials and material with respect to that as well, and that will feed over into week 4 as well, because week 4 we'll continue discussing this. And so that is our preview video for week 3.